technical wizard. Some say he was born in Cornwall, while some say he's on a journey. It's The Journey, and here's your host, David Hackett.
Another journey. Today's journey features a journalism, literature and English teacher at Scott High School. He's also a fantasy writer, which we'll see why when he talks about it. He's also a host of a podcast, which we will no doubt promote for him. Most writers are fans, and it's about the intersection between writing and fandom. Our guest is professionally written for the Coal Valley News and Screenrant. He has won awards for writing and broadcasting from the West Virginia Associated Press, the National Broadcasting Society, and MarCom. He has a BA in English from the University of Phoenix and an MA in English Education from Western Governors University. So, not my journey, it's Terry Bartley's journey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
A pleasure. So, the joke, and I like how I always say this now because it is a long-standing joke. The long-standing joke is, and there's a way to break the ice. Everyone has a journey. The earliest memory possible, yeah, you was born. That's a joke over. Because obviously you were born. But what was the earliest memory that inspired you on your journey?
Yeah, so the one that stands out in terms of inspiring me on this like writing journey that I'm on. So I remember it was like third grade. There was this contest called Take a Kid to Dinner that we did in school, and we just would write like different kinds of fiction stories, and the teacher would pick the best one, and then like take that person to dinner with like all these other teachers and kids. I remember getting like really invested in it, and like I remember like crafting this really like elaborate world that looking back is like pretty juvenile now, but I was also in third grade, so like should be. But I remember like getting really invested in like writing this fiction and like creating this world, and like I didn't win ultimately, and then like I really didn't write seriously for quite some time after that. And I wonder if that had a lot to do with it, like the fact that like I didn't get the feedback I was hoping for whenever I was that age. But I look back at that as kind of like evidence that this journey I'm on now, like this kind of like developing worlds and investing in characters and all those things, that is something that has always kind of been in me, you know?
It's like you say about creating a fantasy world. It's like you've probably heard of the film and read the book, The Never Ending Story.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is the fantasy of one boy's belief, because he had a lot going on in his mind, and I'm not saying there was anything going on in your mind, but it was a lot of in his mind that ended up into nothing because his mind clouded to be the way it was because of all the upset.
Oh, I have ADHD, so there's plenty going on in my mind at all times. So,
and
I fully get it.
And I do understand about ADHD as well, so I understand that too. So your fantasy world, when you started writing, was it a small fantasy, or was it always been that big, expansive, open world?
Like the third grade story, or the one I'm writing? Yeah.
Third grade.
Yeah, so in third grade, it was more of like, I put together, but it was almost like fan fiction, but like in its own, but like an original kind of fan fiction, because it was like there were like Power Rangers elements and like you know, like a lot of like fantasy things like magic and that kind of stuff. But then I also were bouncing between like planets. Like it was set in our solar system, and they were like going to each planet, and there was like alien life on each planet and stuff. So I mean, it was pretty expansive in terms of that, but it also was very character driven in that there was like a specific journey that they were on, and there wasn't like other things they were doing. It was just like this like path that they had to like complete.
Yeah, and then obviously as you get older and more mature, the story becomes more stronger for you because it was a more elaborate way of being positive, because obviously when you're third grade, you have to keep it into the context of how old you was. But when you got older, it matured with you.
Yeah. So now, whenever I write, it's a lot more. It's I feel like fantasy and sci-fi, when it's done well, is a really good reflection of our world in one way or another. And I often feel like fiction is a better reflection of our world than like nonfiction is, because you get like these interesting insights. So like my writing now is very allegorical. Like I address a lot of things like colonization and like um the ways that like institutional racism exists and how we interact with it in our world. And I mean, that's very much influenced by, the world that I live in now, right?
Mm. And I just like how that is. So, talking about now and and it said in the notes that you gave me, it said you're a host of podcast, which is called Most Writers Are Fans. We talk about your book in a minute, but most writers are fans. It's true, because most writers do listen to other authors and they
Yeah.
become writers themselves. Like I've written stories in my past. I'm inspired to be so many stories, but I used to like Roald Dahl growing up because of Charlie
Yeah.
and the Chocolate Factory. Now, I wrote a story once and I based it on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now, I couldn't copy it, but I made my interpretation of it. So
Yeah.
is your story based on what you read, or is it your own pure imagination?
Yeah. The way that I think about it is I think that my stories are very much the stories that I would want to read. It's a lot of things that are very inspired by a lot of things that exist now. Like I feel like there's elements of like the Kingkiller Chronicles by Pat Rothfuss, or like Rainbow Rowell's Simon Snow trilogy. Like there's definitely elements of different things. But I feel like what makes it different than most mainstream fantasy is my focus on like having a lot of like queer inclusion and characters that are, like in relationships that are more unconventional than what you would typically see in a normal fantasy like mainstream world. And for me, like that's important because like I would have loved to have read, as a kid, like a Harry Potter but gay. You know what I mean? Like I would have loved that as a kid. And it just didn't exist. So I'm trying to sort of like put that kind of thing out in the world and just hope that it can find those people that need it.
Yeah, it's finding the right niche market, as I always learn. You've got to find the audience that will grab it and say, yeah. But I do understand what you say about Harry Potter. There's a lot of, we read a mainstream book. What happens if there is the alternative? And there is always that alternative in lots of things.
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved fantasy. I don't even know if it's like I like to say that it's an escape, whatever. But honestly, like I just love the aesthetic. Like I think that magic is cool, like I think it's fun to think about if magic existed and these like magical creatures and things. And I think that I've always sort of craved this like idea of adventure. I think that resonates with a lot of people. So like that's kind of what I want to write stories about people going on like these magical adventures so that we can kind of like experience it with them.
Yeah, so talking about writing and how you write as a whole, because you admit you've got ADHD. Does this help keep your ADHD at the level where you feel like you're at a, and I'm trying to not be disrespectful how I word this, so I've got to be careful and our listeners and viewers will understand that. But does it keep you on the level where you feel more relaxed within yourself?
I think it gives me direction, and I really use it in that way because I've only been diagnosed with ADHD for like maybe like 4 or 5 years.
Mm.
So like I was very much an adult by the time I got diagnosed, and I think that it brought it into focus like how I had lived my life, because I had jumped around to job to job to job a lot before I started writing. And once I got diagnosed, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense because I've been so impulsive, in these decisions I made whenever I would switch jobs. And it's interesting because like every job I would say to myself, like, this is like my purpose in life. I finally found the thing I meant to do. And then I would move on to another job like 2 years later. And it's like, well, maybe that wasn't the thing, but this is the thing now. Now I found the thing. And what it came down to is I was just like not settling. Like I couldn't find a path that I could stick with.
Mm.
So what I've been trying to do with writing is just like have a thing, like one thing that I focus on, just kind of like consistently do. So like whenever I first got diagnosed and I started to try to like control it, I started writing once a week, every week. And like it wasn't every day. It wasn't, like it wasn't anything crazy. It was just once a week, every week I would write. And I think that just that consistency instilled in me like the importance of it and like the priority of it. And I think that really helped sort of like move me forward.
Yeah, and I understand that totally because, I've got autism and autism can be a challenge, but at the same time, finding a niche market to do something to keep my levels of autism balanced is to be that way, and interviewing people and listening to people tell me their journey. That's my balance because I like to hear people tell me their stories. So that's
Yeah.
why I call it the journey, because I'm on a journey, but I'm not on a smooth journey going straight forward, just listening to other people. I'm going on little slip roads or diversions or the bumpy roads just to get to where I want to be. But there's no clear end destination for me because that's what autistic people are like. They never have a clear destination. They always go on. It's like ADHD. It's always going on and on and on and on and on, non-stop.
Yeah, and really what I've noticed is like there's some level of self-control that has to happen that I don't have naturally. So I think that just having this default of like, well, writing is the thing that I'm pursuing is very, very useful, because like if somebody, because it used to be I would just say yes to like every opportunity, right? Like anything that came up, I was like, well, that sounds fun, I'll do that. And now like whenever somebody asks me to do something that's going to be like a substantial amount of time, I ask myself, like, will this advance my writing career? Like, is this something that will actually be useful to me, the thing that I want to pursue? And if it's not, like, I say no. And I think that that's been really helpful because I don't just sort of jump on every new thing. Like, there's some direction. You know what I'm saying? Like it gives me any direction, which I think is just useful to sort of like have that filter that I don't have naturally.
So going into the present, and we touched upon it at the very beginning. You're writing a book now, I believe. What is that book about? If you can give us a sneak taste of it, and we can.
Yeah. So sort of there's a bit of both. So I've got a book that I've written already that's coming out in August called Tyranny of the Fae. It's a short story collection set in this original fantasy world that is about three main characters. Like I said, a lot of allegory about colonialism. And then we sort of, each character is a bit of a snapshot into the history of the world. So it's sort of like establishing the world to some extent. So there's one character who is a magical researcher that lived in the Fey realm that wants to address the magical energy crisis, playing on like what we've got going on here a little bit. And she finds this magic rich world that she sort of like wants to figure out ways to like pull into her world a little bit, like use some of their magic to help invest with what they're doing, which obviously turns into a colonialism thing where she tells the higher ups about it. They're like, "Oh, cool, we'll just live there now. Like we don't need to like borrow things. We'll just live there and take it over." So then we jump ahead a few hundred years to another character named Aisha, who's a princess from the Fey realm. But like at this point, the elves have already like come back because it became so overpopulated with humans. They're like, this place is bad now, so they just left. And Aisha runs away to this other world to find adventure. And we sort of get to see the impacts of the colonialism. So like, we think of, because I don't think we think about how much it has touched our culture and how much it really like impacts how we live our lives, right? Like I speak English in America, not because like it's like a language I think is fun and cool. It's because the English, colonized the place that I live hundreds of years ago, right? So like the language they speak in my book is Elven because the elves colonized and like that's the primary language.
Yeah.
So like they, even though it's English, like they call it Elven because that's who did it. So I try to incorporate a lot of those elements, and Aisha's journey is kind of that, and we get a couple hundred years because she's an elf in her life, and then we jump ahead to another character named Karuk, who is a orc from this tribe. There's a lot of like indigenous allegory with the orcs and the goblins in my world, and we kind of get to see what her life is like, many, many hundred years after the colonization. and like what is her tribe's life, and then also like what is it like being a young person in a place where your life is very segmented and you want more. And we sort of we follow her as she sort of like chases this idea of adventure and finds it, with a group of like a found family.
Yeah.
So that's the book that's coming out in August. But I am actually writing the next book already, that I'm writing right now. So this book is setting up a novel that I've already written. That's the thing I wrote like years ago. That'll be coming out next August. But I'm also writing a series of short stories to set up various little elements in the world and characters. So the book I'm writing right now is really interesting. It's about a changeling, and the changelings in my world are like this group of assassins, that are like very secret. No one knows about them. And I'm writing about one of them who wants more of an identity, because like usually they're just like a number and they do missions. They don't really like, they're not supposed to be people. They're supposed to just be like tools, right? And this one character like sort of starts to develop more of an identity, and we sort of follow that. And it explores a lot of things about like identity and gender, and like what is, how important is a name? What makes a person different than just like, the things that we've been told we are,
Yeah, and it's just those elements that makes a bigger picture, because you say about 3 mini stories to make a bigger picture, and that is a good baseline to have the 3 main stories to make here a bigger picture. Now, you was talking earlier as well briefly about the English language, about American English. And I always make the joke, because obviously I'm British, but live in the American way. So I'm still adapted to certain words, like you say tomato, I say tomato. But it's just different ways of expressing different words. So when people read it on paper, it's the same written as in the English British way. But in the American, you can hear it in the American English way. So it makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, like it just seems so silly, like the different spellings of words, right? Like I had an editor tell me recently that I spelled gray Grey, which is like the British spelling. We would use AY here, and like I've used them interchangeably because like I don't care. Like I don't know what's right. Like if they both seem right, and they are right, just in different places. And that often comes up in my work, like because like I consume British media, so like I see both spellings, and I know what the word is, so like it's just one of those weird things where it's different, but it's not really.
Yeah, it's like in England, another example. Most websites in America are .com because of commercial reasons. England stamped their stuff .co.uk. There is some .coms, but usually it's .coms when it's a business, not a independent website. Even though most websites are commercialized over in England, the same as they are in America, they stamp it as .co.uk. Yeah. It's like you go to France, you got .co.fr. Go to Spain, .co.uk. So you Canada.ca. But
I feel like it's such a good demonstration of how the US views ourselves, because like we don't have a co.us, because it's like, well, we're the default, so we don't need to have one that's just us.
Well, it's like you go to the phone system. Most of the phone system, US is .1 because it is +1. Yeah. Go to the UK, it's +44. So you've got, but so where can people get hold of these mini stories plus your news stories when they get released?
Yeah, so you definitely should check me out on my website is terrybartley.com. That'll be the easiest place to find me. Then I have links to all my social media stuff there. I post a number of videos on like TikTok, where I talk a lot about everything. But then also I have a Twitter, things like that. Follow me anywhere and you'll find out. There's a newsletter there also that I post quarterly. So it won't be overwhelmed with email, but you'll get at least one email every season-ish. So that's a good way to figure out what's going on. The book itself is coming out in August. It's available at like sort of any independent bookstore. You can order it because it's being distributed through their systems, but also you can get it like on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Really anywhere you can buy books, you can find it. And it's just Tyranny of the Fae.
Hey, one last thing before we go. What inspiration would you give future writers with ADHD, with normal writing, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think first of all, I'd say like definitely pursue it, because I think that whenever you have ADHD, our minds are naturally creative. Like it just gives us an insight that other people don't have, and I think that it's important for us to use that. So like if you want to be a writer, like don't feel like you can't do it because like maybe you weren't as good in school, or maybe you feel like you don't have the focus, because like you can find it in one way or another. Then the other thing I would say is like just make sure that you break it down, because I think that in ADHD we get so stressed that we're not as far along as other people in our lives. Like we always compare ourselves to like not even to other people, but just like the idea of where we're supposed to be. And I think like allow yourself to say, and this is, with this podcast, I think it makes sense. Understand that you're on your own journey, and like it doesn't matter if it doesn't look like what you think it's supposed to look like. It is your journey, and there's nothing wrong with that. So like just, accept that you are where you are, and that as long as you keep moving forward, you're going to get where you want to go. It just might take longer, and that's okay.
Harry Bartley, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
That was The Journey, hosted by Wise Words Imaging, hosted by David Hackett. Be sure to like, subscribe, and listen to another journey coming soon.